Well, welcome back to episode 3 of our painting a panel. It's a fairly straightforward process. We've got to the stage now where we've applied our undercoat, so we've put on 4 primers. And remember, it's all about film thickness, so we're looking to build those primer levels up until we get around about that 100-120 microns. Using this system, there's no rubbing down, so following the primer coatings, we then apply our undercoats. So this has had 3 of the International pre-coat and left to dry. We usually leave it about 72 hours to dry out, which is gives it plenty of time to harden up, to make the sanding nice and easy. Now, I've been in this morning. I've already sanded up to here because watching someone sand is not the most entertaining of things. So it's important to remember, all we're trying to do is just remove the brush marks that were there, which are built up over those 7 coats. So we want a nice flat finish. 320 sanding grit is what we're looking for. So I've got the Bosch GEX 150 here. They're quite a workhorse. I've got a fairly soft pad on there, so it's nice and easy to work with. 320 grit, as I said. Just remember that the longer you sand with the same disc on, that 320 grit is now getting up to 400, 500, 600. So in the end, you're not really doing any sanding, you're more polishing, and it will obviously take a lot longer. But the most important thing is you're not abrading the surface. The surface has to have, if you like, minute scratch marks left by this so that the gloss coat can adhere to it. It was only the other day I was running one of my courses and someone said, how do you stop paint peeling off when you take tapes off? Well, it shouldn't really be an issue unless you're using some fairly exotic sort of tape that rips paint from surfaces. But general masking tape, I'll show you the one I use, but general masking tape shouldn't be taking paint off. It's more likely that the paint is not adhered properly to the surface below. So it hasn't got that key to hold on to. And realistically, certainly this morning, I've found that a strip not more than sort of 18 inches wide was as much as one sanding disc wanted to do. Now, you may have a softer undercoat, which is easier to rub down. You can do a little bit more. But just remember, the longer you sand, the more you're reducing the grit, if you like, the abrasiveness of this pad, and then you become polishing. So that can be an issue for when your paint starts sticking to it, or don't stick to it. So I'm just going to finish off that last little bit, and then we'll just take a quick break while I put a couple of coach lines on, and I'll show you my techniques for glossing. So I'll get on with this. I can already detect that that's needing another pad, so never be frightened to change your pads. So there we go. It's on a 60-foot boat or 70-foot boat, it's a long process to work your way down. But most importantly, change the pads regularly. Make sure that you've got a good surface to work on. Right, I'm going to just stop for a minute. We're going to get this coach lined up and join you and welcome you back in a few minutes once we've finished. Okay, well, we're all prepared. So the panel has been hoovered and tack clothed off just to remove any dust. Then we've coach lined it. I've just done it nice and simple. You can always have a look at the coach lining video to see how we do corners and verticals. So just a couple of horizontal lines. Earlier on, I was just sanding that last little bit, and I'm using a hoover that's extracting the dust through the machine that I'm using. I didn't bother putting a dust mask on, but it's not a bad idea just to pop one on. There's not a huge amount of dust created because you're extracting it, but you never know, and if you're going to do a lot, then pop a mask on. Another use for a mask, a lot of people obviously don't have the facility to work inside. If you are working outside and the steel of the boat that you're working on is quite cold, just remember your warm breath will condensate on that steel. If you pop a mask on, the moisture that you're breathing out tends to be trapped in the mask. So it's a little less likely that you'll pass that on to the steel surface. People, when they concentrate, often get quite close to their work, you know, they're looking, so you're breathing on that steel, you're leaving the moisture there, which you're going to sort of paint in as you start. So masks, obviously for protecting you from dust and that sort of thing, but also quite useful for when you're painting outdoors. Okay. I'm going to paint this panel in its entirety, as in we're going to do a little border and we're going to do a bit in the middle. I would only ever paint both panels, if they're different colours, once at the same time, if you like. So we're going to do a dark border and then probably a light panel in the middle. Now, on our first application of gloss, we regularly do that. We'll paint both bits at the same time. Not simultaneously, but do one then the other. Because we're not really bothered too much if, should we get a little drip on the main panel or a bit of something off the roller and that sort of thing. Because the next day it's all going to be rubbed down. We've got multiple coats to go on. However, we only ever do it for the first coat just to get a start. And then the next day we'll probably do the border, and the following day we'll do the central panel. Whichever one we're doing, we don't rub them both down. We only rub down the one that we're going to actually paint. And that's quite important, because if you've rubbed the border down and you've also rubbed the central panel down, while you're painting this you will get a bit of spray off the roller, particles dropping down onto here. If it's already rubbed down, the next day you come in, you'll start painting, and you're painting over top of those little speckles, which on close inspection look like dust particles or start to give you quite an uneven surface. It's not that significant, but if you keep doing it on all the coats, you get a more and more sort of speckled appearance to your paintwork, and you can spend ages wondering where these apparent dust is coming from, but it's not dust, it's what's coming off your rollers. Another little tip is, once you start using a roller, keep it for the duration of the job that you're doing. So once you've finished, put it in a plastic bag, roll it up, seal it. That roller will be perfectly okay for the next day. Throw your paint tray away and that sort of thing, but keep the roller. Now the reason for that is the rollers do shed. You'd think a high density, high quality foam roller, nothing would come out of it. It doesn't matter how many times you roll it out on a piece of cardboard or whatever else, there will be something. The next time you use that roller out of the bag, almost nothing will shed from it, because it's been rolled out over a large area doing your boat. If then you put the roller back in another clean bag, never use the same bag so there's no contamination, back in another clean bag, wrap it up, put your next coat on, and you'll be amazed at how what apparently was dust particles and things like that all suddenly start disappearing, because a lot of that is actually contamination from a roller. You would think, cool, new roller every time, wash my brush out, all that sort of thing. It actually is detrimental to your surface to keep changing to a new roller. So a little tip there, it just works for us. And it's a sort of fairly simple thing. Now I've got a new roller, so I'm expecting a few bits in this, but it's just a demonstration for you. When you start with your roller, and I haven't got a lot of area to work with here to show you in detail, but when you start with your roller, it's a sponge. So it'll only absorb so much paint in one go, and you'll find the more you paint, the more paint absorbs into the roller, and as a consequence you can paint slightly larger areas. But be very aware when you first start, you're not getting a lot of paint on the surface, so don't spread it out. The technique we use using the roller and the brush, we're just using that roller as a means to get an even coat of paint on the surface. The nice thing is, if you put a coat of paint on, or you've done an area and you think, I don't know, it looks a bit thin, or there's not enough there, you can get in your roller tray, you can add to it. That's not so easy to do if you're working with a brush. Not impossible, but not as easy. So I'm trying to show you the ways in which we go about it, where you'll get a nice finish at the end of the job. So I'm just going to load my roller, just dip it into the tray and then work on the top half of the tray. Bear in mind it's a sponge, and we're trying to get this sponge to absorb some paint so that we can get a decent quantity onto the surface. So I've loaded my roller, and again, people will often, by hook or by crook, not really thinking about what the first application, don't put your roller or the first amount of paint at the end of somewhere or in a corner, because going that way you can't spread paint any further. You can only spread it in front of the roller. So I went on up here, and then I can always work my paint back to where I want it. Remember that all we're trying to do is push the paint around where we want it, not where the paint wants to go. My brush was clean, but I'm just dabbing the ends of the bristles in, so it's not a completely dry brush. I do one horizontal stroke along the tape line, and then we're laying it off. Now I'm laying it upwards for a reason. If this was a handrail that I'm laying up into the top of the handrail, if I went the other way, I would be wiping my brush on the handrail edge. So I'm going to end up with a bead of paint along that top surface. And after we've continued painting for a while, that'll suddenly end up as a sag or a run, because it's fallen off that handrail. So take it up and you won't have any problems. Now, I haven't gone very far, look, and I'm back in that roller tray. I know the roller's not going to have loads and loads of paint in it, so till it starts to fill up, we're just going to use it over a fairly short area, small area, and then we're going to lay it off. Other little things to consider, depending on the colour that you're using. Some colours, sometimes dark blue for instance, it looks like you've got no paint on. You've put made your first application, you're looking at it and you feel like you can see straight through it. Don't try to keep applying paint until you can't see through it. Don't overload the surface. If the pigmentation in the paint is not that high, that's why you can see through it. It just means you're going to need multiple coats, and it's better to put multiple coats on than it is trying to overload the coating, because then you'll just give yourself problems. There'll be too much paint on the surface, it's going to run, it's going to sag, it's going to cause you some problems. So never try to overload a surface just because you feel like you can see through it. Better to be able to see through it and put some more coats on than spend the next day trying to get all the sags and runs out of it because you overloaded the surface. Okay, so hopefully that'll help. I haven't counted how many times I've been into that roller tray, but my roller is starting to get a bit of paint in it now, and I feel like I'm getting the measure of it. Now, just bear in mind that there are data sheets for all the paint products and everything else that you'll use. They'll tell you how thick to put the paint on. You can use a paint film thickness comb to check that. It's not about trying to get on as much paint as you possibly can in as fewer applications. The paints are designed to go on at a certain thickness, something that you can comfortably manage, and they'll dry at the right rates. You'll have no problems working with those paints if they're applied at the right thickness to start with. If you get an application on there and it's too thin, very quickly you'll see that or feel that. The paint will seem like it's drying almost immediately, because it is, because it's so thin. Your brush will drag in it, you'll have all sorts of problems. If it's too thick, as we just mentioned earlier, certainly overloading a surface because you can feel through it, see through it is a fairly common thing to happen. Then sags, you know, and if you do end up with sags in the paint, you've got to leave it a long time to dry out. Bearing in mind it's sagging because it's overly thick in that area, and you're going to need to give it plenty of time to dry right through before you can sand it. It's almost worth, if you're painting and you actually can see that paint has run or sagged in an area, one little thing you can do is, although it will ruin the surface, is get a dry brush and just try to lift that out, spread it if you like. Yes, it's going to look a mess when you've done it, but the next day when it's all dried out and it's a much more even coat, although it may look a bit rough where you've pulled that sag out, at least it will sand up much better, and you haven't got that overly thick surface, which may in some cases still be almost wet, even though you know, underneath that bubble of paint. So a few things to think about as you're going. You can see me going right down onto the gunnel with this. That's making sure we get that well line covered. The undercoat was down there because I painted it with a roller, and you can see I've got an inch of undercoat there that's been prepped. So I'm taking the gloss down on purpose, not going madly onto the gunnel, but it's all going to make sure that we get a nice little joint there, because when I put the gunnel paint on, I'll take the gunnel paint over the top. So I'm actually making like a sandwich. So we haven't got two edges of paint joining right in an area where moisture can collect water and rainwater and such. And the last thing we want is anything penetrating that joint. So that's that bit done. Just gonna give me a brush of rinse out, swap colours, and we'll just go on with that main panel. Okay, so we've got that panel, or the border done. Just bear in mind, if you're doing a border, and generally speaking, I'm just painting it almost like a central panel, so you'd have your verticals in as well. Wherever you start at your verticals, and then do a bit at the top, a bit at the bottom, bit at the top, bit at the top. Don't attempt to go all the way round, because when you get back to the start, that edge will be totally dry and you won't be able to get the two to go in together. So it's a case of working both bits at the same time, and that will stop you getting into trouble. A couple of little things as well, all trying to help you with the best finish. With your roller trays, it's very tempting sometimes, if you're working outside or something like that, to put your roller tray on the floor or wherever you're putting it. If it's a bit of a breeze around, you'll get all sorts of dust ending up in your roller tray. I've just sat mine on the gunnel for now, but when we're painting in either of our workshops, We've got little trolleys, little three-tier trolleys that we just pop the paint on, and you can pull the trolley around and it just keeps your paint up off the floor and out of harm's way. You can paint holding the roller tray in your hand and just swap between the two. The only thing I would say is while you're concentrating on the panel, it's very easy to pour it over your foot. And I've on lots of the courses, people have gone, and then you look down and they've got a foot full of paint. So putting the tray down somewhere where you've got those two tools in your hand now, you've got your roller and your paintbrush, just makes life easier for you. So I've just pulled the little fume box over to there, look. So I can put my roller tray on there, I can work from that, and I'm quite free. Okay, so as your roller starts to fill up, just remember, it's not an excuse then to suddenly start painting huge areas. It just means you don't go to the tray quite so often. But just while it is filling up, you can see there, look, we can get a good bit of coverage, but we're not trying to overload that surface. Now, I'm coming down from the tape because I'm pulling my brush into the window aperture. What I don't want to do particularly is go up out of it, because I'm going to be wiping the edge of my brush along this sharp edge. So I'll be taking paint off, it'll be dripping inside. Obviously we'd have this taped up if it was a boat, but it'll still be have paint dripping down onto your paper, onto your window, and there's no need. So at the bottom end edge here, we're just lifting that up again, so we're going into, what we don't want to do is pull that brush down, catch a bead of paint on the edge of that window frame, and then that's going to end up as a little run. Thing is with runs in paint, they never occur while you're there. They always wait till you've gone home and then sneak down off the tape or wherever it is you've just got a little bit too much around a door hinge or something like that. So keep working. You may notice as I put paint on, I'm not looking to put paint on top of a surface. I'm basically making little boxes and working them together. This way, where one lot of paint joins another, we've not overloaded that area. So that should be a nice even coat. Now I can come off that top tape, straight down to the bottom edge. People worry that there's not enough room between the two colours that you've painted to do this wet on wet, but as I've said, we don't do this two surfaces wet for any length of time, you know, in the application process. We'll do it on the first couple of coats like this, and then we stop doing it. So in with the roller, and just again, just highlight the paint is not up to the tape and it's not up to the paint that I've just used, laid off. And then my next application will be below it. Again, I'm leaving gaps, and the next one below that. Okay, the reason is now that I can spread, and if I need to put some more on, I can put some more paint on, but I can spread this paint around. I'm trying to avoid having overlapping areas on the immediate application with the roller, which will double the amount or double the thickness as I start. Consequently, that's where you'll get double the amount of paint, double the weight, and that's where a sag is likely to occur. So just try to think it through a bit, I suppose, is all it is. Just making sure that you're not going too heavy in any one area. The nice thing about a roller, and you saw me do it on that last application, is you can blend it all together. That's a lot harder to do with a brush. Not impossible, that's how you coach paint using, you know, one or two brushes. You still do this square type approach that we you'd still do the vertical, horizontal strokes with a brush, and then you'd blend them all together. That's a fairly common and fairly accepted way of doing it. But, so I didn't join them together. I am now. There we go, look, it's all joined together. But then the roller pulled through the paint like that, gives you that nice even spread. So when I put the brush on it. Now the nice thing is, as well, is I've covered that area, or I've painted that area fairly quickly. So the paint hasn't had time to start drying. The longer you take with the application of the paint, the more time it's got to dry. So certainly working outside, you might be in a situation there where it's trying to dry very, very quickly, a little bit thin in application, you're working with a brush, it's taking you a little time to get that paint on the surface, and then everything is just made that much harder. So the advantage of this little system here with the roller is we can get it on nice and quick. We're not rushing, we're just using the roller to its best advantage, which is spreading paint around nice and evenly, making life very easy to work with. Now I'm totally aware that there are people saying, oh yeah, but that's not proper traditional coach painting, or you know, you should be using a brush, or for both, you know, putting it on and laying it off, or two brushes. What I'm doing here really is just showing you how we do it. Not saying it's the right or the wrong way, it's just how we do it. You'll get a good paint coverage. Importantly, you'll get a good film thickness, which is what's necessary for long-term protection as far as the boat is concerned. And it's an easy process. So it's something I can show you how to do. It's what we do. I'll be painting later today a customer's boat, and I'll be using exactly the same technique. It's fairly foolproof, and you will attain the surface, or you'll attain the finish that you want. Now, you can pull through this applied paint as many times as you like, reducing the pressure that you're putting on, helping to reduce any brush marks in your surface, and so on. Just bearing in mind, these paints dry quickly. The longer you mess with it, the more likely you are to start dragging the surface and creating a less. As far as I'm concerned, that's painted. We'll leave that to dry. We can come back to that. We can give it a nice sand down, removing any surface particles that have been trapped in it. You often find your first coat, you've got all sorts of bits in it that have off the surface, but once you've got that first gloss coat on, it seems to seal everything up. We'd go over that now with probably 400 grade on a nice light hand sander. We'd apply another coat, and then probably go to 600, just so very light sand before we put the final coat on. Now, number of coats, it's 3, 4, it's whatever, remember, the data sheets tell you, whatever the paint manufacturers say is necessary. Don't try and put 2 coats on thick, because that doesn't have the same effect as putting 4 coats on at the right thickness. So make sure you read the data sheets, make sure you see how many applications you're supposed to be working with, and that'll ensure that the surface and the finished job is what you're after. So I hope that's been helpful. We will be doing some more. I haven't gone through the gunnels and how we prep those and put texture into gunnels, or any areas, decks that you want to walk on. So we're going to have a look at that in some future videos. So again, hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll catch you next time.